Many people who humiliate others in public are not as confident as they appear. In fact, they are often deeply insecure. But instead of confronting their feelings of inadequacy, they adopt a mask of false superiority. It becomes a defense mechanism, a way to feel powerful in moments when they actually feel powerless inside. Think of the person who mocks someone's appearance, intelligence, or background in a room full of people. That behavior doesn't arise from strength, it rises from fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being seen, fear that their flaws might be exposed, so they divert the spotlight by shaming someone else. This is the twisted logic of insecurity. If I make you look small, I might look bigger. It's an emotional illusion, and unfortunately, it often works temporarily, not because they become more worthy, but because others around them don't want to become the next target. These individuals often grew up in environments where worth was measured by comparison, where love was conditional and vulnerability was punished. Over time, they learned to survive by tearing others down. Public humiliation becomes a performance not for you, but for the crowd they want to impress. But beneath the performance is a wounded inner child, scared, unseen, and desperately trying to convince the world that they matter. Their cruelty is often a cover for how much they doubt themselves, and instead of healing, they pass on the pain. When you understand this, when you truly see that the person attacking you is operating from their own sense of deficiency, you begin to shift. You begin to separate their words from your worth, and you begin to reclaim the dignity they tried to take from you. Public humiliation is often a direct expression of a person's unresolved shame they've buried so deep they can no longer contain it. Instead of facing their pain, they externalize it. They push it outward, and in doing so, they look for someone else to carry the emotional weight they refuse to bear themselves. Shame is one of the most corrosive emotions a human being can carry. It whispers lies like, "You're not good enough. You're unlovable, you're broken." When someone is drowning in shame, they will do almost anything to stop themselves from feeling it, even if it means humiliating someone else. So they project, they find fault in you, they mock your accent, your choices, your success, or your struggle not because you deserve it, but because you represent something inside them that feels unbearable. It could be your confidence, your kindness, your truth, or it could be something as simple as you standing in the light when they feel trapped in the dark. This is not a conscious decision. Most people who humiliate others don't sit and plan to wound you, but they act out of compulsion, out of deeply rooted patterns they never learned to question. They learned maybe from their family, maybe from school, maybe from a lifetime of pain that the only way to manage shame is to make someone else feel it. So when they shame you in public, what they're really doing is trying to hand you their emotional baggage, but just because they hand it to you doesn't mean you have to take it. Their shame is not your identity. Recognizing this truth is the first step in breaking free from the emotional trap they've set. It allows you to step back and see that their behavior is not a reflection of your value, but of their unresolved wounds. Humiliating someone in public is often not just an emotional impulse, it's a tactic, a psychological power play designed to create dominance. For those who feel powerless in their own lives, publicly shaming someone becomes a twisted form of control. It gives them a fleeting sense of superiority, a momentary illusion that they are in charge, even if everything else in their world feels chaotic or uncertain. These individuals may not have control over their emotions, relationships, or past trauma. They may feel invisible in private, unheard at home, undervalued at work, overlooked in society. So when they step into a public space where others are watching, they seize the opportunity to flip the script. They make someone else feel small, believing it will make them appear larger. But humiliation isn't about communication, it's about domination. It's not a mistake, it's a move. It's often calculated, even if unconsciously, to destabilize you emotionally. By embarrassing you publicly, they try to weaken your sense of safety and worth, especially in front of others. Because the more off balance you feel, the more in control they appear. It often shows up in workplaces, schools, even families where someone uses sarcasm, passive-aggressive remarks, or direct insults to assert their status in front of an audience. They want the room to laugh with them, not at them, and so they choose a target, often someone kind, soft, spoken, or different, and they strike, not to teach, not to uplift, but to control the narrative and redirect attention away from their own inadequacies. This power play is rooted in fear. Fear of being exposed, of being irrelevant, of being powerless. Public humiliation becomes a shield against their own perceived failure. It's a performance, and in every performance, there's a script. But the good news is, you don't have to play your assigned role. You don't have to shrink to protect someone else's ego. When you see their attempt at control for what it truly is, a desperate grasp at significance, you begin to understand that you were never the problem. You were just in the room when their insecurity needed a stage. Humiliating others is often a behavior that doesn't arise naturally. It is learned, absorbed from toxic environments where shame, dominance, and emotional neglect were normalized. People don't just wake up one day and decide to humiliate others in public. They are shaped by the emotional climates they grew up in, the models they observed, and the pain they never processed. For many, cruelty was modeled as strength. They were raised in homes or communities where ridicule passed for humor, where bullying was masked as tough love, where authority figures belittled others to assert control. Maybe they were humiliated themselves as children, mocked for crying, insulted for failing, shamed for simply being themselves, and no one ever apologized. No one ever showed them another way. And so, in order to survive that emotional terrain, they adapted. They hardened. They learned to strike first before they could be struck. They absorb the message that power comes from making others feel powerless, and they carry that belief into their adult relationships and public interactions. This conditioning often goes unchecked. It becomes invisible, the normal way to speak, to joke, to lead, especially in environments like schools, corporate offices, or even social media, where toxic patterns can be rewarded with laughter, applause, or attention. But underneath that behavior is an emotional history, a story of someone who never learned how to express vulnerability without punishment, someone who never saw compassion modeled in moments of conflict, someone who still carries the emotional blueprints of a childhood where respect was rare and ridicule was routine. When humiliation is a learned behavior, it's often passed from generation to generation like an emotional virus. Parents do it to children, teachers do it to students, managers do it to employees, not because it's right, but because it's all they've ever known. It's a cycle of pain repeating itself until someone is brave enough to break it. And when you're on the receiving end of that humiliation, it can feel deeply personal, but in truth, you're standing in the path of a storm that started long before you arrived, a storm that was likely brewing in that person's life for years, if not decades. Understanding this doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps you not internalize it. You start to recognize that the attack isn't about you. It's about the emotional conditioning they never questioned, the pain they never healed, and the empathy they never received. One of the most common and least acknowledged reasons people humiliate others in public is jealousy. Not the kind that's easy to admit, but the kind that hides beneath sarcasm, passive-aggressive remarks, and cutting jokes. When someone sees in you what they deeply long for but feel they cannot attain, it creates a painful tension inside them, and humiliation becomes a misguided attempt to release that tension. Jealousy is rarely about wanting what you have on the surface: your clothes, your smile, your success. It's deeper than that. It's about the qualities you embody, your courage to be yourself, your peace of mind, your ability to walk into a room and not shrink. That's what stirs something inside them. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your presence reminds them of what they've denied, abandoned, or failed to access within themselves. Instead of facing their own insecurities or acknowledging their envy, they attempt to cut you down. They criticize your dreams, they mock your passion, they belittle your authenticity, not because you deserve it, but because your light unsettles the part of them that feels dimmed. Your success, no matter how humble or hard-earned, becomes a mirror to their unrealized potential. And rather than doing the inner work, they attack the mirror. Public humiliation is, in these moments, an emotional disguise, a way for the jealous person to mask their longing as judgment. It allows them to feel, just for a moment, like they have the upper hand, like they've put you in your place. But really, it's a way of managing their own discomfort with what you represent. You see, it's easier to call someone too much than to admit you feel like not enough. It's easier to make someone feel small than to sit with the feeling of your own stagnation. That's the emotional math of jealousy. Subtract someone else's worth so you can add to your own, but it never works. Not really, because humiliation doesn't fill the hole, it just spreads the emptiness. Understanding this dynamic helps you decode the message behind the attack. It wasn't about your mistake, your appearance, or your voice. It was about what you awakened in someone who hasn't made peace with their own identity. When you realize this, something shifts. You stop reacting with shame. You stop questioning your value. And you begin to understand that their criticism may not be about your flaws, but about your freedom. At the core of many public humiliations is something tragically human, the desperate need to belong. People will go to great lengths to feel accepted, even if it means turning on someone else. In group settings, especially where there's tension, uncertainty, or unspoken power dynamics, individuals may choose to humiliate another person not because they hate them, but because they're terrified of being excluded themselves. This form of behavior often shows up in classrooms, boardrooms, social circles, and even online communities. Someone spots a vulnerable target, maybe someone different, someone who stands out, or someone who has made a mistake, and instead of showing compassion, they join in on the humiliation. They laugh, they pile on, they make a remark, not because it's right, but because for that brief moment they're signaling to the group, I'm not like them, I belong here. It's a tribal instinct rooted in our evolution. For centuries, exclusion from the group meant danger, even death. That fear hasn't left us. Now it just plays out emotionally instead of physically. And when someone is insecure about their place in the group, they will sometimes sacrifice another person's dignity to protect their own social survival. This is why public humiliation often escalates in crowds. The individual may not have the courage to humiliate someone one-on-one, but in a group, they feel safer, emboldened. The audience becomes their armor, and instead of standing up for the one being humiliated, many in the crowd remain silent, not out of agreement, but out of fear. Because if they speak up, they might become the next target. The saddest part is that the person being humiliated becomes a kind of emotional scapegoat, a symbol, not a person. Their humanity gets erased in the service of someone else's need to fit in. This is how toxic group dynamics are born, where belonging is based not on shared values or kindness, but on shared cruelty. And it spreads unless someone has the courage to say, "This is not okay." We don't have to bond over someone else's pain. But in the moment of humiliation, the target often doesn't see the bigger picture. All they feel is isolation, shame, and betrayal, especially when people who could have spoken up don't. Yet, when you take a step back and look at it through this lens, you see the pattern. The person humiliating you isn't powerful, they're performing. They're making a trade your pain for their moment of social acceptance. And that's not strength, that's fear with a microphone. At times, public humiliation is not about the target at all, it's about someone trying to manage their internal chaos by unleashing it outward. This is known as emotional displacement, when a person redirects feelings they cannot express in their actual context, such as anger, grief, frustration, or helplessness, towards someone who is safer, quieter, or simply within reach. They're overwhelmed. Maybe they're carrying the weight of a failing relationship, financial pressure, loss, or emotional trauma. They have nowhere to put all that pain, and they haven't been taught how to process it in a healthy way. So instead of looking inward, they lash out. Publicly humiliating someone becomes a valve, a temporary release for emotional pressure they don't understand or feel capable of naming. It could be a boss yelling at an employee for a minor mistake, not because the mistake was truly critical, but because they are under pressure from their own superiors. It could be a parent humiliating their child in public, not because the child deserves it, but because the parent is exhausted, unsupported, and emotionally flooded. It could even be a stranger who snaps at you online or in a store, not because of you, but because their emotional world is collapsing behind the scenes. You become a canvas for what they're unwilling or unable to face. Their harsh words, sarcasm, or aggressive tone may have little to do with who you are and everything to do with what they're running from inside themselves. Displacement is often unconscious. People don't wake up and say, "Today I'll shame someone because I'm hurting." But that's exactly what happens when there's no self-awareness, no inner work, and no healthy outlet for emotion. Humiliation becomes a transfer of suffering, and the tragedy is that it often lands hardest on those who least deserve it. The person humiliating you might not even realize they're doing it to avoid feeling something unbearable, but that doesn't mean you're obligated to absorb it. Their displaced pain should never become your personal truth. This kind of behavior is often a cry for help disguised as cruelty, a reflection of someone drowning emotionally and grabbing at anything to stay afloat, even if that means pulling others under. But just because they're sinking doesn't mean you have to go down with them. When you understand this form of displacement, it helps you untangle yourself from the narrative. You begin to see that you were never the cause, only the nearest outlet. So what do you do when someone humiliates you in public? You pause, breathe, and remember the truth. Their words are not your identity. Their shame is not your burden. Their performance is not your reality. You are not here to carry the emotional weight others refuse to deal with. You are not here to shrink so someone else can feel tall. And you are certainly not here to be a mirror for wounds that were never yours to heal. When you are humiliated in public, you may feel powerless in the moment, but in that moment, you hold a power they'll never understand. The power of restraint, of clarity, of choosing not to become like them. Set your boundaries, stand in your truth, speak if you need to, walk away if you must, but never let someone's cruelty convince you that your light is too bright, your presence too much, or your worth negotiable. This world is full of people trying to cope with invisible battles, but that does not give anyone the right to harm you. Dignity is not something you beg for. It is something you protect quietly, firmly, unapologetically. So today I ask you, reclaim your voice, protect your light, honor your story, and remember what someone says in cruelty is always a louder reflection of their wounds than your worth. You are not what was said about you. You are who you choose to become after.